On a luxury flight to New York, a young black billionaire quietly boards in disguise, only to face humiliation when a white passenger steals her first-class seat. But what happens next grounds the entire plane and exposes a truth no one saw coming. For more unbelievable stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Simply Stories. It was a quiet morning at the private terminal in Los Angeles, the kind of place where the wealthy slipped in and out without fanfare. The soft hum of jet engines mixed with the low murmur of conversation as passengers for Flight 976 to New York lined up for boarding. Among them was a young woman in a beige hoodie, jeans, and dark glasses, moving with quiet purpose. No designer luggage, no entourage, no flashes of wealth. To anyone watching, she looked like a college student or a tired traveler just trying to get home. But her name on the manifest read, Ava Brooks, the 24-year-old tech prodigy whose AI company had taken the world by storm. Few people ever recognized her in public, and she preferred it that way. Fame was loud. Power, she'd learned, was silent. Ava handed her ticket to the gate agent, who gave a polite smile and a quick double take at the name before nodding her through. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Brooks." Ava smiled faintly and walked down the jet bridge, her calm steps echoing against the metal floor. She had seat one, the best in first class, a fully reclinable suite she'd booked weeks in advance. It wasn't about luxury for her. It was about peace. She had meetings waiting in New York, deals to close, and she wanted the quiet to think. As she stepped into the cabin, the flight attendants greeted her warmly. "Welcome aboard," Ava nodded, her voice soft. "Thank you." She turned left into the first-class section and froze for half a second. There, already seated comfortably in her seat 1A, was a man, white, mid-40s, with slicked-back hair and a gold watch that seemed desperate to be noticed. He was sipping champagne, his briefcase sprawled across the adjoining table like he owned the plane. When Ava politely approached and said, "Excuse me, I believe that's my seat," he barely looked up. His eyes flicked toward her, dismissive, amused. "Oh, sweetheart," he said with a smirk, his voice thick with condescension. "Maybe you should check your ticket again. This one's for business travelers." The words hit with the soft sting of arrogance, casual and cruel. A few passengers nearby chuckled quietly, sensing drama. Ava didn't flinch. She glanced at her boarding pass again, calm as ever. "Yes," she said softly. "Seat 1A, that's what it says." She held it up. The printed name, Ava Brooks, visible in bold letters. The flight attendant, a young woman named Emma, hurried over, sensing tension. "Is there a problem?" Ava handed her the ticket without irritation. "Just a mix-up, I think," she said. Emma smiled awkwardly and turned to the man. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass, please?" The man, Mark Dillard, as it turned out, sighed dramatically. "I'm a platinum elite," he said, waving his hand like royalty shooing away a servant. "Just put her somewhere else." "I'm already settled." Emma blinked, unsure how to respond. "Sir, I understand, but seat 1A is assigned to Ms. Brooks." "Then reassign it," Mark interrupted. "You can handle that, right? Or do I need to call someone higher?" The tone in his voice made a few heads turn. Ava's calm expression didn't change. She stepped aside slightly, her voice quiet but firm. "It's fine," she said to Emma. "Let's just handle it by the book." Emma nodded nervously, murmured, "Yes, ma'am," and hurried toward the cockpit to call the captain. Mark leaned back in his stolen seat, chuckling to his seatmate. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "These people think they can just walk up here like it's open seating." The seatmate gave an uncomfortable laugh. Sensing the attention building around them, Ava stood silently near the aisle, hands folded neatly in front of her. She wasn't angry. She'd long learned that some battles were won not by shouting, but by letting others expose themselves. Her silence filled the space more powerfully than any confrontation could. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances, the chuckles fading, the calm in her posture, the quiet intelligence in her eyes. Something about her didn't fit the image Mark had mocked. Emma returned moments later, her expression a mix of apology and tension. "The captain is coming, Miss Brooks," she said softly. Ava nodded once, grateful. Mark raised an eyebrow. You called the captain for this? He scoffed. What, is she some kind of VIP? Emma didn't answer. Behind her, the sound of polished shoes approached. The cabin seemed to still as Captain Reynolds appeared at the entrance of first class, tall and composed, his pilot's cap in hand. What seems to be the problem here? His voice carried authority, but when his eyes landed on Ava, something shifted. His expression softened, respectful recognition flickering instantly. Ms. Brooks? He said, his tone changing completely. I didn't expect you to be on this flight. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Heads turned. The name hung in the air. Mark frowned, confused. Ms. Brooks? He echoed, uncertain. Ava gave a polite nod. Good morning, Captain. I just believe there's been a small seating mistake. Captain Reynolds glanced down at the manifest on his tablet. The name Ava Brooks, Seat 1A, glowed clearly on the screen. He looked up, then at Mark, his face tightening. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop. The passengers, sensing something was about to shift, fell silent. The captain straightened, his calm tone carrying quiet authority. Sir, he said evenly, addressing Mark, you're sitting in a seat that doesn't belong to you. Mark opened his mouth to protest, but Captain Reynolds didn't give him the chance. He turned back to Ava, his respect clear. Ms. Brooks, he said, his voice lower now, allow me to handle this personally. And in that moment, before another word was spoken, everyone on that plane realized this wasn't going to be just another seating dispute. It was the beginning of something no one on Flight 976 would forget. The cabin had gone silent. The soft hum of the engines filled the air, but every passenger could feel the shift. Captain Reynolds stood tall at the front of first class, his presence commanding instant respect. He turned toward Ava, his voice calm but sincere. Ms. Brooks, he said, I didn't expect you to be traveling commercial today. The words carried through the quiet cabin like a small shock wave. A few passengers turned in their seats, whispering to one another. Did he say Ms. Brooks? One murmured. Another leaned closer to their phone, quickly searching the name. Within seconds, recognition rippled like electricity. Ava Brooks, the tech billionaire, the AI visionary, the youngest woman ever to make the Forbes list. Mark Dillard, still lounging in seat 1A, blinked in confusion. Wait, what? He muttered, sitting up a little straighter. His confidence faltered, but his pride didn't let him back down. Hold on, this is ridiculous, he said, forcing a laugh. I don't care who she is. It's just a seat. He turned to the captain, trying to sound casual, but failing. You can't be serious about this. Captain Reynolds' polite expression hardened. Sir, you're occupying another passenger's assigned seat. I'm asking you one last time to move to your correct location. Mark scoffed, running a hand through his hair. You're seriously grounding the plane over a mix-up? He said loudly, trying to win the crowd back on his side. Look, we're all adults here. She can take another seat, I'll compensate her. I've got an important meeting. His tone carried arrogance, but his words were trembling around the edges. The other passengers no longer laughed. They were watching him, waiting. Ava stood there quietly, her face unreadable, her calm unbroken. She spoke softly, her tone so even that it drew more attention than his shouting. Captain, I don't want any drama, she said. I just want fairness. Captain Reynolds nodded once, his authority unwavering. And you'll have it, Ms. Brooks. Then to Mark, his voice turned sharp. Sir, if you don't comply, I'll have to ask security to remove you from this aircraft for non-compliance with crew instructions. The words hit hard, but Mark crossed his arms defiantly. You can't be serious. You're grounding this entire flight because of some seating error? The tension in the cabin tightened like a wire. Ava looked at him quietly, then let out a soft breath. Without a word, she reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. She wasn't recording, and there was no anger in her movement, just quiet precision. Her fingers moved across the screen, typing a short command. The text read simply, Protocol 12, Flight Delta, 976, delay 10 minutes. She pressed send. Mark frowned, puzzled. What, you texting your lawyer now? He sneered. But seconds later, the cabin lights flickered subtly, and the flight attendants exchanged surprised glances. The intercom buzzed softly, and from the cockpit came a brief announcement. Attention crew, we are experiencing a short hold for a verification process. Please remain seated. The captain looked up sharply. He hadn't given that order. He turned to the attendant near him, who shrugged, just as confused. Within moments, the cockpit door opened and a co-pilot stepped out, holding a tablet. "Captain, just got a message from Central Command," he said quietly. "Flight 976 is under a 10-minute delay for a security verification. Came straight from the Delta Tech system." Captain Reynolds' brow furrowed. Then he turned to Ava, realization dawning. "Ms. Brooks," he said slowly, "did your company authorize a hold on this flight?" Ava met his eyes with quiet grace. "Yes, Captain. Until this is sorted, no one flies." Her tone wasn't threatening. It was steady, controlled, like someone who didn't raise her voice to be powerful. The entire cabin felt the weight of her calm authority. Whispers spread like wildfire through the rows. "She grounded the flight?" Someone whispered. "Wait, she has that kind of control?" Another said. Emma, the flight attendant, looked stunned but composed, her eyes darting between Ava and the captain. Mark's smug grin had vanished completely now. His face flushed red as he fumbled for his words. "You can't just... that's not even..." He looked toward the cockpit, searching for support. "This is insane. Who does she think she is?" A voice from the back of first class answered quietly, almost reverently. "She's the reason this plane's AI navigation works." Mark froze. A few people nodded. They knew. Ava Brooks's company supplied security and automation systems to major airlines. If she sent a protocol, the system obeyed instantly. She wasn't bluffing. She had the power to stop the plane mid-runway if she wanted to. Captain Reynolds adjusted his cap, his tone now fully professional. "Ms. Brooks, I'll ensure this situation is resolved immediately." He turned to Emma. "Please contact ground security." Emma nodded quickly and reached for her radio. Mark, now visibly nervous, stood halfway, his voice shaking. "Wait, you're really calling security? This is ridiculous. You're ruining my reputation over a seat." Ava didn't respond. She just looked out the small oval window, her reflection calm against the glass. Moments later, the cabin door opened again, and two airport security officers stepped inside. Their uniforms gleamed under the soft cabin light as they walked down the aisle. Passengers whispered, phones tilted just slightly for a better view. Mark's mouth went dry. His eyes darted from Ava to the captain, then to the approaching officers. "This is a mistake," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't do anything wrong." The captain didn't answer. The officers stopped by his seat, one of them speaking firmly. "Sir, we've been asked to escort you off the plane for non-compliance." Mark's jaw dropped. He looked around for sympathy but found none. Ava didn't even look at him. She didn't have to. Her silence had said everything. The entire cabin held its breath as the officers stood waiting, and in that suspended moment, Mark Dillard finally realized that the woman he had mocked wasn't just another passenger. She was the reason the entire plane had stopped moving. The air inside the cabin felt heavier than before, a mix of tension and quiet fascination rippling through the passengers. The flight had been grounded for nearly 15 minutes now, and whispers filled every corner. A few passengers began recording discreetly on their phones, capturing the rare sight of airport security standing beside a furious man who refused to accept that his arrogance had finally met its limit. Ava sat silently in the corner of first class, her eyes calm, her hands folded neatly on her lap, as if none of this chaos had anything to do with her. But everyone knew it did. Everyone could feel it. There was something extraordinary about the young woman sitting so still while the world around her reacted. Security had taken over the investigation, and the lead officer was scrolling through the manifest on a tablet, his brow furrowing. After a few moments, he turned to Captain Reynolds and spoke in a low, professional voice. "Sir, Seat 1A has been confirmed under Ms. Ava Brooks for 3 weeks. This passenger," he gestured toward Mark, "is assigned to Seat 14B in economy." The words landed like thunder. Gasps rose from the rows ahead, a murmur spreading faster than the engines could ever run. Mark's mouth fell open, color draining from his face. "That can't be right," he stammered, his voice cracking. There must have been a glitch in the system. Emma, the flight attendant, shook her head gently, holding up the printed list. No, sir. The system's clear. Ms. Brooks' booking has been locked for weeks. There's no error. Mark's words tumbled out in desperation. No, listen, I'm a Platinum Elite member. The system must have upgraded me. That's what happens with priority passengers. But no one was listening anymore. The crowd's judgment was silent but sharp. It wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about how quickly a person's true nature shows when they think no one important is watching. Captain Reynolds turned toward Ava, his expression filled with regret. Ms. Brooks, on behalf of the crew and the airline, I want to sincerely apologize for this incident. Ava looked up at him with the same serenity that had defined her from the start. It's not about me, Captain, she said softly. It's about respect. Her tone was so measured, so poised, that it silenced even the background chatter. For a moment, all that could be heard was the low hum of the plane's idle engines. Then, from one of the first-class seats, a small voice spoke. A little boy, no older than 8, tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered a bit too loudly, "Mom, she looks like the lady from the news, the one who made the smart glasses." His mother smiled awkwardly, trying to quiet him, but it was too late. The words spread like sparks through dry air. Heads turned again, eyes widened, and someone whispered, "Wait, Ava Brooks? The tech billionaire?" Another voice answered, "The youngest one. She built that AI company, the one that works with airports." Within seconds, everyone knew. Mark's shoulders slumped. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. He looked at Ava, his arrogance dissolving into something close to fear. I didn't know who you were," he muttered weakly, avoiding eye contact. Ava turned to him, her expression calm but unyielding. "You shouldn't need to," she said, her voice quiet but powerful enough to echo in every mind that heard it. The cabin fell utterly silent. Security moved closer. "Sir," one of the officers said firmly, "we need you to gather your belongings and come with us." Mark blinked rapidly, shaking his head. "This is insane. You can't just—" "You've refused crew instructions," the officer interrupted. "You're being removed for non-compliance." The man's defiance crumbled. He grabbed his briefcase with trembling hands, muttering under his breath, but the humiliation on his face was unmistakable. As he turned to step out, Ava slowly stood. Her voice came clear and measured, carrying through the cabin like the closing line of a film. "Next time you take someone's seat," she said, her gaze steady, "make sure it's not someone who built the system that printed your ticket." The words landed like a strike of lightning. Half the cabin gasped. A few even clapped softly before catching themselves. Mark froze, his face a storm of shame, but Ava didn't gloat. She simply sat back down, her hands returning to her lap as if the moment had already passed. Security escorted Mark down the aisle. Passengers leaned back to make room, their eyes following him. Some whispered, some shook their heads. One older man muttered, "Serves him right." Another said quietly, "That's what happens when you think money equals class." The door opened with a hiss, and Mark disappeared down the jet bridge, his figure shrinking out of sight. The silence that followed was thick with awe. Captain Reynolds turned back toward Ava, his tone softer now. "Miss Brooks," he said with respect, "we're ready to resume when you give the word." For a moment, she didn't respond. She looked out the window at the sunlight breaking over the runway, at the planes taxiing in the distance. Then she gave a small nod. "Let's get everyone home, Captain." The captain smiled faintly, tipping his cap. "Yes, ma'am." He turned toward the cockpit, and the low roar of the engines began to rise again. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, resetting trays and calming passengers, their voices a blend of professionalism and quiet admiration. But as the plane began to prepare for takeoff, every passenger on board knew they'd just witnessed something rare. A moment where power didn't shout, it whispered. Where respect wasn't demanded, it was earned. And as the aircraft doors sealed shut, one thought lingered in everyone's mind. This wasn't just a flight delay. It was a lesson. The engines hummed steadily as the plane prepared for takeoff again. The tension that had gripped the cabin earlier now replaced by a quiet respect. Ava sat back in seat 1A, the very seat that had sparked the chaos. Her gaze turned toward the oval window. The morning sun stretched golden lines across the tarmac, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself a slow, steady breath. Emma, the flight attendant, approached cautiously, her face still carrying traces of guilt. "Ms. Brooks," she said softly, "I just wanted to apologize again for everything that happened earlier." "I should have handled it faster." Ava turned toward her with a warm smile that melted the young woman's nerves instantly. "Emma, you did exactly what you were supposed to do," she said kindly. "You stayed calm and you stayed fair. That's more than most would have managed." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, discreetly handing it to her. "For handling things gracefully." Emma blinked, stunned. "Oh, Miss Brooks, I can't—" "You can," Ava said with quiet insistence. "And you deserve it." The attendant nodded, her eyes glistening as she whispered, "Thank you." The captain stepped out of the cockpit a few minutes later, adjusting his cap as he approached. "Ms. Brooks," he said respectfully, "on behalf of the crew, I want to apologize again for what happened earlier." "It shouldn't have escalated that way." Ava gave a polite nod. "You handled it professionally, Captain," she replied. "No harm done?" The captain hesitated, then smiled slightly. "If you'd like, once we're airborne, I'd be honored to give you a quick tour of the cockpit as a small apology." Ava chuckled softly. "I might take you up on that." There was something comforting about how normal it all felt now. No drama, no confrontation, just people doing their jobs again. As the plane taxied down the runway, Ava's reflection glimmered faintly in the glass. She wasn't thinking about Mark Dillard or the humiliation he had brought upon himself. Instead, her mind drifted to the quiet lessons life kept repeating, how easily people underestimate those who don't shout, how often silence is mistaken for weakness. She had lived her life letting results speak louder than her voice. Even when others tried to talk over her, she learned to let time answer for her. And time, she thought, had never failed her yet. Moments later, the aircraft lifted gracefully into the sky. Clouds rolled beneath the wings like soft fields of white, and the hum of engines became the rhythm of peace. Ava closed her eyes briefly, grateful for the calm. Then her phone vibrated softly on the armrest. She glanced at the screen, a message from her assistant. "Social media's on fire. Seatgate trending. Want to comment?" Ava's lips curved into a faint smile. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before typing back a short reply. No statement. Let the action speak. She put the phone face down and leaned back in her seat. She didn't need to chase attention. The truth had already done that for her. While Ava sat quietly, the world outside was erupting. News channels ran headlines within the hour. Tech billionaire grounds flight after discrimination incident. Videos recorded by passengers had already gone viral. Clips showed Mark being escorted out, his arrogance turned into a public lesson. Commentators debated the story, some praising Ava for her composure, others analyzing the deeper meaning of what had happened. But Ava didn't watch any of it. She didn't need the validation. What she did next spoke louder than any headline. Before the plane even landed, she authorized a $500,000 donation to a foundation that trained young girls of color to become pilots. The same dream she once had as a child before coding changed her path. The press would find out about the donation later, but by then she'd already moved on to her next meeting, her next innovation, her next quiet revolution. Hours later, as the plane began its descent into New York, the cabin buzzed with an odd sense of unity. Passengers whispered among themselves, glancing toward the front of first class. Some smiled in admiration. Others simply sat in quiet reflection. When the seatbelt light came on, a few people approached Ava to thank her. One older woman with silver hair paused beside her seat. "Ms. Brooks," she said softly, "you didn't just ground a flight today. You grounded ignorance." Ava's expression softened, her voice almost a whisper. "That's all I ever wanted," she said. The woman smiled warmly before returning to her seat, leaving Ava with a moment of stillness that felt like peace. As the wheels touched down and the aircraft slowed along the runway, sunlight flooded the cabin, washing away the last traces of tension. The passengers began to clap softly, not for the landing, but for something deeper. Ava looked out the window one last time, her mind already returning to her work, to her company, to the endless possibilities ahead. The flight that began with humiliation had ended with dignity. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't needed to fight back with anger. Her calm had done more than power ever could. The narrator's voice lingered like the echo of truth itself. In a world that still measured worth by color, power, or class, Ava Brooks had proved that dignity flies higher than any seat number. The engines slowed to silence and the passengers began to disembark, each carrying with them not just their luggage, but the memory of a moment that reminded them of what grace truly looked like. For more stories like this, subscribe to Simply Stories.